At 5:17 local time, the sea around the U.S. carrier appears calm and empty. Then the radar picture changes. First one surface contact appears, then 4, then 9, and then enough of them to make everyone stop pretending it is routine. On the flag bridge, there is a brief silence. The marks on the screen are moving quickly, low over the water, spreading outward before curving back in. This is not merchant traffic. It is not fishing activity. It is not random motion. Inside the ship's operations center, the report comes through sharp and controlled. Multiple high-speed surface contacts bearing 085 through 113. Range closing. Another voice follows almost immediately. Additional contacts developing to port. The carrier stays on course. That is the first important detail. No sudden turn, no visible panic. Just thousands of tons of American steel continuing through the Gulf as 20 Iranian fast craft begin forming something that looks less like a passing encounter and more like a closing ring. On the flight deck, yellow shirts pause in the middle of their work and look beyond the bow. From that height, the approaching boats first look like thin white streaks on blue water, almost too small to take seriously. But their wakes tell a different story. They are moving with speed, with coordination, and with enough purpose to make every eye on the ship pay attention. Condition 3. Set and man key stations. The order moves through the carrier without theatrics. It does not need theatrics. Sailors turn, move, secure their positions, put on headsets, close hatches, check screens, confirm circuits. On a U.S. aircraft carrier, pressure does not begin with shouting. It begins when the ship's systems quietly come alive. The first bridge-to-bridge call goes out in English. Iranian fast craft approaching U.S. naval formation. This is a United States naval vessel operating in international waters. Alter course immediately and maintain safe separation. There is no response. A second call follows. Still nothing. On radar, the pattern becomes harder to dismiss. The boats are not simply racing straight toward the carrier. That would be easier to understand, easier to predict, and easier to answer. Instead, they are doing something more calculated. 4 craft angle toward the formation's starboard side. 6 more stretch across the carrier's projected path. Others widen to port, then begin curving inward as if drawing a box across the surface of the sea. The tactical action officer studies the display for only a moment before saying what everyone in the room is already thinking. They are building an enclosure. That changes the feeling on every deck. A swarm maneuver does not need to make a single move beyond closing distance to become serious. It only needs to reduce space, force decisions, and create one moment of confusion. Ahead of the carrier, an escort destroyer assigned to the screen adjusts position by a few degrees. The movement is subtle, controlled, precise. Another escort holds aft and tightens the shape of the formation. Nothing looks dramatic, nothing looks reckless. It is simply purposeful movement, the kind that says this carrier group understands exactly what is unfolding. The carrier still does not turn. From the island, lookouts now have visual confirmation. Low hulls, narrow profiles, hard wakes. Some boats are painted in muted coastal colors. Others appear as dark shapes bouncing through the chop. From this distance, they do not look powerful. They look small, almost expendable. And that is exactly what makes them dangerous. Small craft in numbers can place even a massive vessel into a narrow decision window. Let them get close enough, and every second becomes tactical, legal, and political at the same time. React too early, and the situation escalates. Wait too long, and the initiative is no longer yours. Inside the operations center, range markers continue to shrink. Closest point of approach decreasing. Multiple contacts increasing speed. One group crossing toward the bow. On the bridge, the captain does not raise his voice. He stands over the chart table, one hand resting on the edge, eyes moving from the forward windows to the tactical display. Maintain course, maintain discipline, record everything. That order matters as much as anything else on board because this is no longer only a navigation problem. It is a test, a pressure move, a chance for Iran's fast craft to make a U.S. aircraft carrier appear slowed, boxed in, even contained. But for the men and women aboard this ship, being contained is not an option. The first boats are now close enough for individual crew silhouettes to be visible. Spray breaks over their bows. Their engines carry across the water. One cluster pushes wider to starboard, then curves back in, trying to close the side. Another group ahead begins staggering its spacing. Not close enough to collide, but close enough to make the carrier's path feel narrower than it was just moments earlier. There is still no radio response from them. No explanation, no warning, only speed, formation, and intent. Below deck, in ready rooms and passageways, sailors feel the tension of the ship even without seeing the full picture. They hear it in the clipped voices over the circuit. They feel it in the way conversations stop halfway through a sentence. They sense it in the sudden precision of every movement around them. On the screens, the contacts keep moving, and on the water, the ring keeps tightening. They feel it in the rhythm of footsteps overhead. They sense it in the way an ordinary morning suddenly turns into a calculation of bearings, speed, distance, and seconds. Out on the water, the ring is almost complete. Not close enough to make contact. Not yet, but close enough to send a clear signal. And as the U.S. carrier continues forward into the shrinking gap, one fact becomes impossible to ignore. This is not random harassment. Iran has just attempted to place a moving box around an American aircraft carrier. By 5:19 local time, the water around the carrier no longer feels open. It is tracked, measured, and contested. On the tactical display, the 20 fast boats no longer appear as separate contacts. They begin to behave like one coordinated system. They are not simply closing distance anymore. They are taking positions. 4 remain ahead of the formation, crossing wide enough to avoid an immediate collision risk, but close enough to reduce the carrier's cleanest path forward. 6 more hold to starboard in a loose arc, adjusting their speed almost together. Another group stays wider on the port side, patient and deliberate, preserving the shape of the box rather than rushing in. Inside the operations center, one operator zooms in on the surface plot and exhales quietly. They are not moving blindly. No one answers. No one has to. The screen already says enough. The first real pressure does not come from noise, it comes from silence. The bridge-to-bridge channel opens again. Iranian fast craft, this is United States naval formation. Your maneuvers are unsafe. Alter course immediately. Maintain safe separation. Static, then nothing. That silence weighs more than any shouted warning. Professional ships communicate. Even tense encounters usually come with words. Warnings, challenges, accusations, instructions. Silence means something different. Silence means the other side wants freedom of movement without responsibility. Silence means they are giving the U.S. Navy a problem to solve in real time, while offering no explanation, no intention, and no room for misunderstanding to be cleared. On the flight deck, catapult activity pauses. That detail rarely becomes the main story in moments like this, but it matters. A carrier lives by rhythm. Launch, recover, refuel, rearm, repeat. Interrupt that rhythm, even briefly, and you have done more than distract the largest ship in the formation. You have forced it to shift attention. You have made the machine pause, and that appears to be exactly what the fast boats want. To port, one boat increases speed, cuts inward, then pulls away just before crossing a hard line. Another mirrors the move from starboard. From above, it would almost look mathematical. 2 points tightening, then releasing, testing the edges of the carrier group's response. Closest point of approach still decreasing. Forward contacts closing. Starboard arc tightening. Port group holding wider, waiting. The reports come in fast, short, and controlled. On the bridge, the captain watches through binoculars as one of the lead Iranian boats pounds across the chop. Its bow lifts sharply, spray bursting around it. Through the glass, he can make out figures on board. These are not fishermen. These are men braced for speed, facing forward, moving with purpose. Farther out, one of the escorts begins a controlled shift to cover the carrier's exposed side. Not enough to suggest panic, not enough to create the image the fast boats may be looking for, just enough to make clear that the formation is starting to bring its own shape into the problem. Still, the carrier holds course. That discipline is intentional. A less steady command might turn too early, overreact, or broadcast discomfort. A less controlled bridge might flood the radios and give away the tempo of the moment. But here, every decision follows the same rule. Do not give the small boats the image they came for. Inside electronic warfare, another voice breaks in. Surface search emissions detected. Narrow band. Intermittent. The room shifts again. It is not a hard targeting signal. Not at this point. But it is enough to suggest that some of the boats are doing more than racing across the water and applying pressure. They are scanning, measuring, building a clearer picture of the formation's speed, heading, and spacing. They are trying to read the screen. The electronic warfare officer repeats the report, and no one wastes words. The meaning is already clear. Now the fast boats are doing 2 things at once. They are compressing physical space on the water while collecting information inside that space. And every second they remain this close, they learn something. Reaction time, screen posture, bridge discipline, radio cadence. But the reverse is also true. High above the deck on the carrier's island, optics teams are capturing everything. Every wake line, every break in formation, every angle of approach. The American side is learning as well. Then one Iranian boat makes the boldest move of the encounter so far. It pulls away from the starboard cluster and drives inward, aiming for the seam between the outer escort and the carrier itself. Not a direct impact course. Not an open strike. Something more dangerous in its own way. A move designed to force a question the U.S. Navy never wants to answer at close range. How much space are you willing to give up before you respond? Inside the operations center, heads lift toward the same display. Fast mover entering inner lane, range decreasing. For a moment, the entire situation tightens around that single boat. Through the forward windows, it is no longer just a symbol on a screen. It is visible now as a hard, skipping hull, twin white wakes trailing behind it as it cuts across the blue water toward one of the most heavily protected ships on the planet. No launch orders come. No dramatic movement from the ship's systems. No one raises their voice. The destroyer to starboard adjusts slightly. The carrier does not. That answer is part of the message. The Iranian boat keeps coming, then turns just enough to remain outside the invisible line that would demand a stronger response. Another boat behind it follows the same curve, reinforcing the signal. Not full commitment, not withdrawal, pressure. Ahead of the carrier, the boats across the forward path begin changing their spacing. They are not closing the bow completely, they are shaping it, making the safest route look narrower than it really is. That is when the tactical action officer says it quietly, almost like a diagnosis. They are shaping the battle space. And for the first time that morning, no one on board can treat this as simple harassment. The box is no longer forming, it is working. At 5:21 local time, the US Navy stops only absorbing pressure. It begins taking the water back. On the carrier's bridge, the order is brief. Go active. No alarm follows, no sudden turn, no dramatic call across the circuit, just a change in posture. Quiet, deliberate, unmistakable. Across the formation, systems that had been watching now begin shaping the encounter. On the starboard escort, the helicopter detachment is already in motion. Rotor blades begin turning, slowly at first, then faster, cutting the morning air into heavy mechanical pulses. Deck crew move low and controlled, signaling through rotor wash and engine noise. In less than a minute, the first MH-60 Seahawk rises from the deck and moves out over the water. A second helicopter follows from farther back in the screen. Now the geometry changes. Until this moment, the Iranian fast boats had controlled the visual rhythm. They were the ones moving first, forcing the formation to read, measure, and respond. That ends the moment the helicopters clear the ships and drop low over the Gulf. Inside the operations center, live feeds appear across multiple screens. Infrared, zoom optics, surface track overlays. The boats that had looked like fast-moving radar contacts are suddenly clear and human. Exhaust heat glows through the sensors. Hull markings begin to resolve. Crew silhouettes sharpen. Mounted equipment becomes easier to separate from railings, spray guards, and deck clutter. The entire swarm, dangerous seconds earlier because of its uncertainty, begins losing the cover of distance. One aviation officer says it plainly. We have eyes on all outer clusters. That matters. In modern naval confrontations, the side that sees clearly first often controls what happens next. The lead Seahawk approaches from outside the starboard arc, staying low enough to be noticed, but high enough to avoid looking reckless. It does not dive toward the boats. It does not fake a run. It simply arrives with the calm weight of a machine built for this environment and flown by a crew that knows exactly how close is close enough. Below, the fast boats react immediately. Two maintain speed. One drifts outward, another throws spray as its pilot corrects course a little too sharply. Small movements maybe, but small movements matter. Pressure works best when the other side is only watching you. Now the Iranian crews have to watch the sky as well. The bridge-to-bridge channel opens again. Iranian fast craft operating near United States naval formation. Your maneuvers are unsafe. Maintain separation. You are being recorded. Still no response. But now their silence is starting to cost them. The second Seahawk swings wide to port and builds a matching orbit, turning the carrier group's problem into a three-dimensional one. The boats are no longer shaping the scene only around hulls, wakes, and open water. Now they are under overlapping observation from above, tracked from multiple angles, with every movement recorded in real time. Inside electronic warfare, the reports continue. The Iranian crews are still testing the formation, still trying to collect whatever they can. But every second they remain close, the US Navy is collecting even more. Voice patterns, formation behavior, reaction timing. Which boats stay steady under pressure? Which ones drift first? Which crews hold alignment? And which ones begin to break it? Ahead of the carrier, the four boats blocking the cleanest water continue their staggered spacing. They are trying to make the path forward look crowded without crossing into a direct confrontation. It is a smart move and a dangerous one because it targets something even a supercarrier cannot simply ignore. Navigation. The answer does not come from the carrier itself. It comes from the screen to starboard. The guided missile destroyer eases outward just enough to strengthen the formation's flank. Not a rush, not a challenge, just steel moving into the seam the fast boats have been pressing against for several minutes. At the same time, the first Seahawk drops lower and sweeps along the outer edge of the nearest Iranian cluster. Rotor wash beats the surface beneath it. Spray tears sideways across the water. The message is immediate. We see you, we are above you, and we are staying here. For the first time that morning, the fast boat formation begins to lose its clean shape. One cluster on the starboard side widens more than intended as two boats create extra space between themselves. Another group on the port side hesitates, caught between holding the box and avoiding the helicopter's orbit. The shift is subtle. From a distance, most people would miss it, but inside the operations center, no one misses it. Starboard arc loosening, port group no longer matched. Forward screen still holding. The tactical action officer gives a single nod. That is the seam. The carrier itself still does not break rhythm. Its massive bow keeps pushing forward, steady and unshaken, throwing white water out to both sides. That steadiness has become a weapon of its own. The helicopters are adding pressure, the escorts are correcting the geometry, and the carrier, by refusing to flinch, is forcing the boats to keep adjusting. That is how a swarm begins to lose control of the moment. Not all at once, not dramatically. One small correction at a time until coordination starts turning into strain. On the flight deck, crews remain clear of launch positions, watching the horizon through heat, shimmer, and salt haze. They can now see one of the helicopters pacing a cluster of boats almost side-on, close enough for every Iranian sailor aboard to read the American markings on its fuselage. No shots, no dramatic escalation, just presence, sensors, and timing. Inside the carrier, another report comes in. Forward contact still screening the path, but a lane is beginning to open between clusters. No one celebrates. It is too early for that. The box is still there, but it is no longer tightening cleanly. For the first time since the 20 boats appeared on radar, the U.S. Navy is no longer simply sitting inside the geometry. It is cutting into it. At 5:23 local time, the encounter reaches the point where one bad decision could turn seamanship into something far more serious. The box around the carrier is no longer perfect, but it remains dangerous. Ahead of the formation, the remaining Iranian fast boats keep working the same idea. Stay just outside the line, crowd the safest water, and force the U.S. Navy to either give up space or create an image that can be used against it later. To starboard, the boats that had loosened under helicopter pressure begin trying to close again. Not with the same confidence as before, but with enough discipline to keep the pressure alive. Inside the operations center, no one is watching the whole sea anymore. They are watching seconds, forward cluster still compressing, starboard contacts adjusting inward, port side holding wider. Closest point of approach falling on lead fast mover. On the bridge, the captain says nothing for a moment. He watches the tactical display, then looks through the forward glass at the thin white wakes crossing the carrier's path. He has no interest in drama, no interest in giving the boats the scene they may have come to create. But he also knows the truth of close quarters naval pressure. At some point, pressure becomes a decision, and that point has arrived. The boldest Iranian move of the morning comes from ahead and to starboard. 3 fast boats break slightly out of their staggered formation and push inward together. They are not driving straight at the carrier. Instead, they angle toward the narrow space between the outer escort and the formation's forward arc. It is a careful move, precise enough to avoid looking reckless, but aggressive enough to demand an answer. And this time, the U.S. Navy answers before the gap can close. It is the most dangerous kind of move in encounters like this. Not a direct strike, not an accidental crossing, a calculated attempt to create a decision crisis. One boat cuts in first, the second follows tighter. The third trails half a beat behind, just enough to complicate the timing of any response. From the carrier's island, they no longer look like a single swarm. They are individual hulls now, pounding through the chop with their bows high and engines screaming. Spray tears off them in sheets. Crew figures stay low and braced. Mounted equipment is visible now, not pointed directly, but impossible to miss. On one of the escorts, a watchstander speaks into the circuit without changing his tone. Lead group making final push. That line moves across the formation like steel because everyone understands what it means. This is the break point. Above the water, the first Seahawk banks sharply and drops slightly, sliding across the outer edge of the 3-boat push. Its rotor wash slams into the sea, flattening the surface beneath it and throwing spray across the lead Iranian hull. The helicopter does not need to fake anything dramatic. Its job is simpler and more effective. Seize attention, disrupt timing, and force the fast boats to solve more than one problem at once. Almost at the same moment, the second Seahawk tightens from port, adding pressure across the front of the moving box. Now the water begins to feel crowded for the Iranians. Too crowded. Inside the operations center, reports come faster. Lead helicopter pressing starboard push. Destroyer adjusting by degrees. Forward lane beginning to widen. That destroyer movement is small enough that a civilian observer might never notice it. But at sea, a few degrees of steel at the right second can change the entire situation. The escort does not rush forward. It does not challenge the boats recklessly. It simply shifts its bow into the seam they were trying to exploit, strengthening the gap and forcing the lead Iranian craft to choose. Keep coming and risk crossing the line, or break away first. That is the kind of choice professional naval formations are built to impose. The first boat holds a fraction too long, then snaps outward. Not a retreat, not an admission, just a hard correction made because there is no more comfortable water left. The second boat reacts half a second later, and that delay is enough. Its wake cuts across the first boat's line. Spray bursts upward. The pilot has to pull wider than planned, bleeding away the geometry that had made the move dangerous in the first place. The third boat, suddenly left without a clean lane, shears away even harder to avoid stacking into the other two. From above, the result is immediate. The three-boat pressure move does not end in a dramatic clash. It breaks apart in spacing, and spacing is everything. Starboard push broken. Forward contact separation increasing. Opening lane confirmed. No one on the carrier celebrates. They are too focused on the next 10 seconds. Because a swarm does not fail all at once. It fails one correction at a time. And sometimes, if given room, it can recover. But the U.S. Navy does not give it that room. The helicopters keep their pressure steady, not reckless, not theatrical, relentless. One passes low off the lead boat's flank, close enough for every man aboard to see the hard silhouette of American control overhead. The other holds a wider orbit, forcing the remaining boats ahead of the carrier to divide their attention between the sea and the sky. Behind all of it, the carrier keeps moving. That is the real blow. The Iranians had tried to make the giant turn, slow, or show uncertainty. Instead, the giant stays on time. Its bow cuts into the widening corridor as if that path had belonged to it from the beginning. Ahead of the ship, the last boats trying to screen the route now face the same choice as the starboard push. Hold position and risk being swallowed by the formation's geometry, or drift wider and preserve selves. One after another, they drift. The clean edges of the box begin to unravel into scattered contacts and broken arcs. The ring that had looked coordinated on radar only minutes earlier is now just a collection of fast hulls, each trying not to be the one that crosses too far or stays too long. On the bridge, the captain lowers the binoculars. No smile, no speech, just one quiet order. Maintain course. And with that, the carrier slides through the gap. Iran had tried to box in an American aircraft carrier. Instead, at the worst possible second, they ran out of room inside their own trap. By 5:25 local time, the sea around the carrier is opening again. Not because the fast boats had disappeared, not because anyone had crossed the final line, but because the moment that mattered had already passed. On the carrier's tactical display, the shape that had looked so dangerous only minutes earlier is now coming apart. The boats are still there. Still fast, still close enough to monitor carefully, but they are no longer moving like a box. The forward screen has broken into uneven spacing. The starboard arc has drifted wider. The portside boats, once patient and controlled, are now reacting instead of leading. The carrier strike group has the water back. Inside the operations center, the tone changes, but only slightly. There is no celebration, no sudden release of tension, just a shift from immediate pressure to controlled follow-through. Forward lane holding, starboard contacts widening. Carrier clear on present course. 3 simple updates. 3 facts that say more than any headline could. On the flight deck, crews begin resetting toward normal rhythm. Not fully routine yet, not completely, but the pause is ending. The massive machine that had absorbed the pressure, measured the situation, and pushed through it is beginning to breathe in its usual tempo again. That is the quiet proof of who controlled the encounter. Because for all the speed and noise of the Iranian boats, they failed at the one thing they came to do. They did not stop the carrier. They did not force a dramatic turn. They did not create panic. They did not produce the image of a U.S. naval vessel trapped inside a tightening ring of small craft. Instead, they gave the Navy something far more useful, a complete picture. High above the water, the Seahawks remain in orbit, still watching, still recording. Every correction the fast boats made, every failed attempt to close the corridor again. Every moment when one cluster drifted out of sync with another. The boats are no longer just pressure points on the water. They are information, and information matters. Inside the strike group, the real aftermath is already beginning. Surface tracks are being saved, signals are being reviewed, any captured voice traffic is being separated and studied. Timing gaps between maneuvers are being compared. Which boats held formation the longest? Which ones adjusted first under helicopter pressure? Which groups tried to coordinate electronically, and which ones relied only on visual movement? That is the part most people never see in moments like this. They see the boats, they see the wakes, They see the tension. What they do not see is how much a disciplined formation learns when the other side comes too close. Iran had approached with numbers, speed, and pressure, but numbers at close range reveal patterns, and patterns are exactly what modern naval forces know how to use. One of the helicopters makes a final pass along the outer edge of the dispersed boats, not low enough to provoke, not high enough to look disengaged, just close enough to remind everyone below that the carrier group is still watching from above, still holding the vertical space, and still in no hurry to leave. The message is clear. This part is over. Do not try to restart it. Ahead, the carrier continues through the Gulf exactly as it had before the first radar calls turned open water into contested water. Its bow cuts forward with the same measured authority. Its wake rolls outward in long white lines. From a distance, it might almost look calm again, but calm is not the same as forgetting. Every officer on the bridge understands what the last 8 minutes meant. This was not random harassment. It was a calculated attempt to put tactical pressure on one of the most powerful formations at sea, to crowd it, to slow it, to create hesitation without crossing into open confrontation. A gray zone move built around proximity, uncertainty, and cameras. And it failed. Not because the boats were harmless, not because the carrier could ignore them, but because the side that stayed calm kept the initiative. That is what amateurs often misunderstand about naval power. It is not always the side that moves fastest. Sometimes it is the side that refuses to be rushed. The Iranian boats continue pulling outward in loose groups now, keeping enough posture to avoid looking like they are backing away, but no longer pressing hard enough to control the moment. They still occupy the sea, they still signal defiance, but defiance is not control. Control is the carrier resuming its mission while the boats fall behind. Control is the escorts returning to proper spacing without ever losing discipline. Control is flight deck activity coming back online while the fast craft that tried to shape the encounter are left reacting to an outcome they no longer own. On the bridge, the captain watches the nearest cluster widen by another few hundred yards. Then he turns back toward the forward windows. No speech, no dramatic declaration, just the carrier driving on. Behind it, the Gulf is still marked by white wakes and unanswered intent. Ahead of it, the water is open. Iran had tried to box in a U.S. aircraft carrier with 20 fast boats. What happened instead was quieter, simpler, and far more telling. The boats came close, the Navy stayed steady, and in the end, the carrier kept moving.